is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas, and here's the second video on the beginner machine knitting project. Now, you need to be aware that there are actually two projects. There is a pattern for you to use if you're working with the standard machine, and there's a pattern to use if you're working with the bulky machine. And this is the yarn that you would buy if you're going to do the standard one. And let me come in close on it. This is a yarn called Baby Bee Sweet Delight Wrap, which was purchased at Hobby Lobby. No affiliation, just handy and easy for me, and I'm hoping you can find the yarn. Now I've zoomed in really close to this label. I want to go over the label with you, in particular in case you can't get this yarn and you have to buy a similar yarn. What you're looking for is a similar thickness, a similar size. So pay attention to these two squares on the yarn. This knitting square is marked 23 stitches. This is a 3.5 ounce ball, 100 grams. This is the yardage, the meters. Here's the fiber content. It's acrylic and polyamide. And then this little row of symbols, the temperature at which it can be washed, machine washable, do not iron, and do not bleach. For the standard gauge project, here's the pink yarn after I wound it on the yarn winder, and I'm going to test it by yanking the center thread up and just make sure that it's not tight inside and that the cake of yarn doesn't lift when I test it. So that's wound just perfectly. This is the pink gauge swatch. It's right off of the machine. It's done on the standard machine with the Baby Bee yarn, and I'm very happy with how it looks knitted. I like the little occasional stripes that don't go all the way across. I like that a lot. Now, this is how knitting is. It rolls to the outside at the top and the bottom, and it rolls toward the back on both sides. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to steam your gauge swatch so it'll be flat. This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. I have put the pink swatch on a thick piece of terry cloth, and I'm going to block it. Now, what I have here is a Jiffy steamer nozzle, and there's quite a bit of steam coming out of it. But notice that I do not lay it down on the swatch. I'm just kind of letting the steam penetrate the knitting, and I'm going to flip it over and just let it penetrate the other side a little bit. Now, I like to take my fingers and just unroll it gently. Remember, this particular yarn said that it was acrylic and polyamide. In other words, it's plastic. And if you put too much heat and steam on it, it'll melt. But a little bit of heat and steam is all it takes to unroll it and get it to lie flat. Now, that would not be an adequate finish for a garment, but it's fine for a gauge swatch. And I'm just unrolling the other side, holding it with my fingers. You do not have to own a steamer to do this. You could do this with a steam iron. And after I get it to unroll that way, I'm going to flip it over because knitting curls toward the front at the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to unroll the top and the bottom, just very gently touching the edge. Now remember, my measurements are going to be in the middle. They're not going to be on this edge that I'm touching with the steamer. I do not want to distort the middle. Now, if I wanted to block this much harder, I could, but it would tend to distort the knitting. Let me compare how the two gauge swatches were made. The gauge swatch on the left is from the standard knitting machine. So, between the marks horizontally, it is 40 stitches, and between the rows from here to here, it is 60 rows. So it's 40 by 60, plus the picture frame of a few extra stitches out on each side and a few extra rows on the top and the bottom. In addition, when I knitted this swatch, as I was beginning it, I wanted to be able to remember that it was done on tension 8, so I have 8 little holes. Now the bulky swatch was done on tension 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 holes there along the bottom. And the center of the swatch, inside the yellow thread, there's 20 stitches by 30 rows. So keep that in mind whether you're making the bulky swatch or the standard gauge swatch, how different the size is. Standard gauge, 40 by 60, 40 stitches, 60 rows. Bulky, 20 by 30, 20 stitches, 30 rows. Measuring the swatches. Now the standard gauge pink swatch is ready to be measured. It has been knitted, blocked, and laundered. And the standard gauge pink swatch, height-wise, if I measure from inside the contrasting color row down to inside the other contrasting color row, I get 6 1/8 there. And I like to measure in a bunch of places, 6 1/8 there, and 6 1/8 there. Now I don't measure right at the very edge where I put in those markers, because the markers take a little bit of room and they make it a little longer there. Width-wise, I measure in between this stitch and this stitch, because inside those stitches, which were put at needle 21 left and needle 21 right, that's the 40 stitches. And measuring there and getting it straight, it appears to be 5 5/8 at that marker, 5 5/8 at that marker, 5 5/8 at that marker, more like 5 1/2 there, 5 1/2 there, 5 5/8 up there. So in the center of the swatch, it's about 5 1/2. Now to measure the... Okay, here's your homework. Your homework is to pick out the yarn for the project, rewind it, and make your gauge swatch, and then block it, which you can do with either a steam iron held above the knitting or a steamer, launder it, and then measure it. And I want you to get the same measurements that I got. So that's your homework. If the item is too large, if the measurement you're getting is too large, try it again with a tighter tension, a smaller stitch size. Conversely, if it's too small, try a looser stitch size. If you have difficulty with the rows being too short or long, you might want to try changing the upper tension on the little dial on the yarn mast. So experiment with your gauge and try to get this gauge within 1/4 of an inch.